The American song and my preoccupation or fascination with song is really this specific dialogue of poetry and music. And when we speak of American song, we really are speaking more of song in America, because, as we well know, America is a nation of many races and many cultural influences. And the astounding fact about arts and letters in America is how creative we've been. I'm not sure we give ourselves as much credit and attention to how consistently and massively creative we have been in telling our story, or telling what it is to be alive now, as Copeland so beautifully told us that only composers and poets can do this. That's all they really can do, is say, this is what it's like to be alive now. And when we look at the arts and letters in America, but especially we look at poetry, and poetry set to music, this dialogue, we have a very powerful, beautiful, eclectic diary or narration of being in America, being American, participating in America, becoming more of America, and also as an American, the American creative spirit, which is quite interesting, is that our composers and poets have spent more time writing and thinking and speaking out of what it means to be a composer or poet, as well as to be an American or a composer or poet in America. Both relationships. It's a very fascinating story that's being told, that is wonderfully associative and reaches people across all walks of life and all points of association to their cultural history. And this is what drives me in American song especially. The issues of poetry and music in dialogue with one another is the essential thrust of any song. And the breakdown becomes the epoch, the language, the cultural tapestry from which it's echoing, if you will. I often say it's the eyes of the poets and the ears of the composers. And this narration is what fascinates me endlessly. The fascinating thing about poetic development or language development is, if you take Whitman in the American context, it's fascinating. This guy begrudgingly gets sent off to criticize Italian opera, or be the critic in the audience, or at least some sort of reporter of the events. Doesn't know much about music, doesn't like music very much. Fast forward 20 years and he's writing Leaves of Grass. And fast forward another 10 years, and he's writing about having written Leaves of Grass, and says, without my experience in music and Italian opera, I would have not found this new way or my way of expressing in language. And then fast forward again another 20 years, and you have other composers saying that without Walt Whitman's use of language, we would have never developed musical style or form to be more flexible to the actual expression. And that's the thrust of the idea, that as we see song develop, this dialogue of poetry and music, both searching for the proper metaphor of the actual human experience, if you will, you see this, especially in American arts and letters, you see this driving passion to, as Emerson said, let the substance that needs to be expressed tell us how to express it, rather than trying to fit it into a form. So that's probably the most salient difference between Whitman and Foster, or better put, the middle of the 19th century. As we move through the 20th century, we see a deepening of this very, how can I say it, deep relationship of exactly what the metaphor is and what each word stands for, and the word finding its own place in its context and its style, versus versus having to fit some sort of, iambic pentameter or something like this, The one I'm singing, I don't recite a lot of poetry. I like to read poetry, and I love to hear a great voice or a great mind recite poetry. I don't walk around the house, sort of regaling people with the last poem. Having sung so many songs in so many languages, there are so many beautiful moments. I'd have to. This will certainly be edited out. I'd have to think long and hard to. Some of my favorite poetry is in German. Some of the very brief moments of reflective thought from Walt Whitman, reside with me, but they're all somehow part of the song literature at this point in my mind.